بحسن قريب ولا تبغى غير؟ الله والله اقول الكرتون بعرف ذا الكرتون بحسن قريب ولا تبغى غير؟ الله ايش تبغى تسوي؟ اقول الكرتون بعرف ذا الكرتون بحسن قريب ولا تبغى غير؟ لا يبغى الله ايش تبغى تسوي؟ حتى حاول بعرف بحسن قريب ولا تبغى غير؟ لا حتى حاول بحسن قريب ولا تبغى غير؟ السلام عليكم. 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 تلفزيون صلصال ولا لا التوبة توضح تتحرك. 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 تلفزيون صلصال ولا
To our Deputy Assistant Vice Chancellor, Dr. Abdullah Khalfan Al-Azri, and Mr. Ahmed Khwaitar Al-Hikri. Your support and encouragement are greatly appreciated. As many of you know, teaching English is not just about delivering content. It's about creating our Deputy Assistant Vice Chancellor, Dr. Abdullah Khalfan Al-Azri. When we bring interactive and communicative approaches into our classroom, we make learning more. Your support and encouragement are grateful for our students. This symposium is an opportunity English to explore not just about delivering, especially as we look at the growing our artificial intelligence, e-learning tools, and most important, you. When we bring interactive and communicative and approaches into our classroom, we make learning more. Your support and encouragement are sharing for our learning. And this symposium is an opportunity. It is a chance not just all of about researchers, especially teachers, as we look at the growing to exchange ideas, learn from one another, and most important about when we bring teachers and community input into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for sharing, learning new connection. As many of you know, teaching English is a chance for all of us, especially teachers, and for all community students to learn from one another, and think about how when we bring teachers and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for sharing, learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As
for
many of
those
you know,
inspiring words
teaching English
and
is a
thoughtful
chance
welcome
for all of
address.
us,
You have truly set
especially
the stage
teachers,
for a
and
productive
for
and
all
engaging day
community
ahead.
students to learn from one another, and think
Now,
about
we move to
how
one
when
of
we
the
bring
highlights
teachers
of.
and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for sharing, learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As many
for
of
those
you know,
inspiring words
teaching English is
and
a
thoughtful
chance
welcome
for all of
address.
us,
You have truly set
especially
the stage
teachers,
for a
and for
productive and
all
engaging day
community
ahead.
students learn from one another, and think
Now,
about
we move to
how
one
when
of
we
the
bring
highlights
teachers
of.
and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As many
for
of
those
you know,
inspiring words
teaching English is
and
a
thoughtful
chance for
welcome
all of
address.
us,
You have truly set
especially
the stage
teachers,
for a
and for
productive and
all
engaging day
community
ahead.
students learn from one another, and think
Now,
about
we move to
how
one
when
of
we
the
bring
highlights
teachers
of.
and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As many
for
of
those
you know,
inspiring words
teaching English is
and
a
thoughtful
chance for
welcome
all of
address.
us,
You have truly set
especially
the stage
teachers,
for a
and
productive
for
and
all
engaging day
community
ahead.
students learn from one another, and think
Now,
about
we move to
how
one
when
of
we
the
bring
highlights
teachers
of.
and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As many
for
of
those
you know,
inspiring words
teaching English is
and
a
thoughtful
chance for
welcome
all of
address.
us,
You have truly set
especially
the stage
teachers,
for a
and for
productive and
all
engaging day ahead.
students learn from one another, and think
Now,
about
we move to
how
one
when
of
we
the
bring
highlights
teachers
of.
and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As many
for
of
those
you know,
inspiring words
teaching English
and
is a
thoughtful
chance for
welcome
all of
address.
us,
You have truly set
especially
the stage
teachers,
for a
and
productive
for
and
all
engaging day ahead.
students learn from one another, and think
Now,
about
we move to
how
one
when
of
we
the
bring
highlights
teachers
of.
and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As many
for
of
those
you know,
inspiring words
teaching English is
and
a
thoughtful
chance for
welcome
all of
address.
us,
You have truly set
especially
the stage
teachers,
for a
and for
productive and
all
engaging day ahead.
students learn from one another, and think
Now,
about
we move to
how
one
when
of
we
the
bring
highlights
teachers
of.
and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As many
for
of
those
you know,
inspiring words
teaching English is
and
a
thoughtful
chance for
welcome
all of
address.
us,
You have truly set
especially
the stage
teachers,
for a
and for
productive and
all
engaging day ahead.
students learn from one another, and think
Now,
about
we move to
how
one
when
of
we
the
bring
highlights
teachers
of.
and community into our hijab, I hope we all make this opportunity your support and suggestion for learning
Thank you,
new
Mr.
connection.
Hamza,
As many
for
of
those
you know,
inspiring
Maybe some of you might be thinking, okay, what happens to people who are mute, deaf, blind? They would also have to develop their own language. I mean, verbal language. Maybe some of you might be thinking, okay, what happens to people who are mute?
It's not the only shape
deaf,
that language takes.
blind. They would also have to develop their own
The backdrop
language.
to
I
what
mean,
comes
verbal
next
language
is AI incidents. We'll try to make it a bit different. He's my student, so he has heard me.
Maybe some of you might be thinking,
I hope there
okay,
is
what
something new
happens to
for you.
people who are
It's
mute,
not the only shape
deaf,
so
language
AI is
blind.
in the background.
They would also have to develop their own
the
language.
backdrop to
I
what
mean,
comes
not
from
verbal
next
language
is we are moving
AI
towards
incidents.
a hybrid knowledge environment. He's my student, so
or
he has heard
maybe some of
says,
you might be
there
thinking,
is
okay, what
something
happens
new
to
for you.
people
A
who
new
are
alien.
mute,
It's not the only
intelligent,
shape.
deaf,
So
that
AI
has
is
blind.
entered our world in the background.
They would also have to develop their own
backdrop
language.
to what comes
and it will
verbal
language
is we are moving
AI
so we're in a hybrid
knowledge
ecosystem already. He's my student,
or
we
some of you
cannot
might be
delete
thinking,
it. There is
what
some,
happens
of course,
to
we
people
could a
who are
new alien.
mute,
It's not the only
intelligent, deaf,
so
that
AI
has
is
blind.
via our world in the background.
They would also have
It
to
will not
develop
be
their own
backdrop
language.
to what comes
and it will
verbal
verbal
language.
language
We are moving
AI.
so we're in a hybrid back to pre-AI times. So daring to embrace language as a threshold. This is the concept that I'll be falling back on throughout my talk. Threshold. Dynamic, a threshold dynamic that takes us on a journey from who we are to how we think to what we risk losing if we limit language to mechanistic coding and encoding. We are English teachers. Sometimes I think, I ask myself, what the heck am I doing with my life? I teach people to use language so that they can build a life that, inshallah, is better and a world that is better. So language is our lives. And if you're doing mathematics, you're doing also that. Somebody said, if we want to know God's mind, let's learn maths. And IT is language as well. So whether you're doing IT or maths or English or Arabic, even religion, if you want, we are dealing with languages. How to describe the world, how to describe ourselves, how to make sense of this thing that is us. And this journey provides us with the scaffold to understand why time for both silence and sense-making silence, both silence and sense-making silence, dialogue and reflection, they are actually biological and ethical necessities. They are not just a luxury. So how can we make time in a university for sense-making silence? I will start with an author that I like. It doesn't mean that I agree with him every point. Let's try that one. There's this idea. Byung-Chul Han, he's a South Korean living in Germany. He's a philosopher. And he says, in the past, we used to live in a disciplinary society. Now we are living in an achievement society. In the past, a very important verb was should or must. We must do this, we may not do that. And that's why we got people like, say, if you're doing psychology, like Freud, and that's why the sexual aspect of Freud is so paramount, because it was a society where this must, may not, should not, we are very much part of it. But now, even in traditional societies, this is not really an issue Actually, it's not anymore four. Now he says the disciplinary society is a society of negativity. And it doesn't mean that people feel depressed. Here it means negativity in the sense of don't. It is dominated by negativity, the negativity of prohibition. The subject of obedience is the subject of should and should not. But he says now we are in the achievement society, which by contrast is a society of positivity. And again, it doesn't mean that we're all happy. It just means that now the main verb is you can, we can, everybody can something now. And its negativity in the past has been removed. Its guiding verbs are now can and to be able to. But herein lies an issue. We will come back to it. A second author that I will use is Miguel Benassayad. And he contrasts existing with function. He says he's a biologist, so he comes from that perspective, but he's also into philosophy. So we are no longer called to exist or to function. The question is no longer who we are, but how efficiently we operate. Now, they said before that I am an expert in quality of life. Now, don't tell me that this is not true in quality of life. How often do we really ask ourselves, who are we as a universe? The main question is, how are we functioning? And even if you read the OAAA documents, everywhere the last question is measuring effectiveness, which is not bad. I'm not against that. Somebody called him Ami, they say. Yeah, Ami, right? Uncle. He said, this is terrible. Call me Ami. I said, okay, what should they call you? And he said, they should call me Yashir. I said, oh, this is crazy. Sheikh means old. The other one doesn't mean old. But you see, the when we talk about language, the semiotic part, the semantic part, the pragmatic part, we're talking about acts, not books. It's what language does, how it describes us. For example, you might have seen so many videos when people start addressing you like auntie, it's like, what? I'm only 45. Auntie? So that language has redefined us. It means they already see me as an, well, aging person. Not old, but aging. So we have the code and we have the threshold. I will be using these words throughout. A code is about rules, it's reversible, and there is no residue. This is important. There is no residue. There is no dirt in it, if I can say that. And the threshold is a passage. The threshold is that space there between this room and the other one there at the door. So here, for example, I have this example. We have Ahmed. He does his own assignment because he wants to be heard. He has to write an essay, so Ahmed says, no, I'm going to write my essay because it should be my essay. I want the teacher to hear Ahmed's voice. And we have Mahmoud, and he says, no, I will use AI because I want the marks. So we have two different cases. Mahmoud is acting according to the code. He knows the code, he knows the rubric, he knows when he gets A, when he gets B. Ahmed is not so interested in the code. He's interested in language as an act, as a threshold, as a space where we meet, where my teacher and I meet, where my mind somehow becomes transparent to myself first and to the other person. So this is the idea of the threshold and the idea of the code. You know this, obviously, because you're all English teachers. So what else? A threshold moment is when language requires us to risk being misunderstood. Like Umberto Eco, he says what language tells us is that language can also be used to lie. Because people think we have language for very lofty purposes. He said, no, we also have language to lie. Language is not only about truth. It's about communication, and we can communicate untruth. And as Gadamer says, every encounter with others and every encounter we have with the world is a process of fusion of horizons. Fusion of horizons. So that's why threshold, different horizons coming together, different horizons touching each other somehow. This is what we should be doing when we are teaching language. It's not just about the code. It's not just about the format of an essay. It's not just about the format even of the thesis. But how are these horizons meeting there? How are we existing rather than functioning? And we could say that the psychoanalytic idea of castration, I know maybe some people don't like the word, has to do with the dethroning of His Majesty the baby. So castration can be understood in a biological or sexual way, but the main idea is that the baby finally learns that there is a world out there, and the world is not his servant. Because the baby knows that when he is or she is very, very young, very, very little, whatever he wants, the mother will come or the nanny will come. So the whole world is there to serve the baby. It only has to cry. Or maybe smile, because these are mechanisms that we develop. We learn that sometimes we get more by smiling than by complaining or crying. But you see, there is this moment when the baby finally realizes that the world is not there for him or for her. And in your case, I mean, the babies really have to learn this, because very often you come from big families. It's very easy to think that you're a king if you're the only child. When there are like 8 sisters and 7 brothers, baby, the baby knows pretty soon that he is not the only one. So this is one of the psychological advantages, I think, of having more than one children. But so the world in language is half, this is the next idea, half someone else's world. It becomes one's own when the speaker populates it. So we teach language. We want our students to use the language to exist as persons that are defining their own identity, their own presence in the world, that are dealing with loss, that are dealing with desire, that are dealing with drive, that are dealing with so many things in life. But even at that, our words are not ours. We were born into a world where the language was there already. We are born into language. When somebody has a baby and they call the baby Ahmed and the other one maybe Moza, the baby is already shaped. You are Ahmed, you will dress like this, you will play these games, you will do this job. You are Moza, you will dress like this. And it's not only Oman, it's everywhere. I mean, it's not that we say, okay, Abaya and this, that, it's everywhere. Whenever we give children names, we already are defining them. So that's also the element and part of teaching language, to realize that we are socializing our students into a world that was there before them and before us. Another idea from another philosopher, Buber. He says, when we have the I and the you and we meet, we create an in-between space, which is a new space. Think, for example, about marriage, if you're married. It's you, it's the other person, and then it's the us. And the us is not him and it's not her, it's us. And many things will happen in that space where we meet. If we had married somebody else, our life would have been different. So language is also a space like that. Just think about how many of our problems go back to language, what somebody said, or what somebody didn't say. So language itself is that in-between space. And then when we use it in a human way, not in a cold, mechanistic way, it's an in-between space. And I will... So to speak is a common word. It's making the world common. We create the other. And I will use another philosopher, Levinas. He says when we talk to somebody, look, when we are working very often, why do we keep our language official? And this is not a bad thing, otherwise we would be crazy and we would go crazy if we didn't. But why do we keep our language official? The we're in an official place, and also because we don't want to have to take into account that it's a human being. And I don't mean it in a bad way. When we go and buy bread, we are there for the bread, not for the baker, unless you're in love with the baker. I mean, if we are going there for the bread, we are there for the bread, right? So I'll give you an example. Sorry, I always give examples. I studied in London. One of my teachers was Italian, and the other one was British. And the British one once complained to me. He says, you know, I asked the Italian guy, Benito, I asked Benito, hey Benito, good morning, how are you? And he said, and you know what happened? Benito told me how he was doing. He says, there I was listening to all these things I didn't want to know. That's his life, not mine, his problems. So he says, now when I see him, I just say, hi Benito, hi, good morning, hi. So, and this is an example. Very often we use language in an officious or official way because there is an aspect of life that is mechanistic. And when we go for A4 paper, we want A4 paper. And it would make little difference whether the lady who gives me the A4 paper is lovely and talkative. Maybe sometimes it does make a difference. Or whether it is a machine where I just press and I get the A4 paper. Sometimes I'd rather take the machine. So this is what, I mean, it's related to this. Levinas says when we use language, when we meet, the other becomes a face. It becomes somebody. When the other is somebody, what I do to the other, I do to myself. For example, let's say we have to go to war tomorrow, okay? And they gave us weapons. How can we go and kill somebody that we are really acknowledging as being someone like me? It would be very difficult. Because if I knew that I am killing somebody who is just like me, I am a bad person. I'm indirectly a bad person. Imagine I am the guy doing the money in the college. I don't imply anything. And imagine I took money from the money that is there. I can do this because somehow I have deleted the face of all those people in front of me. Because if I really believe that they are real human beings whose money I'm taking, it would mean that I am bad. When Europeans went to Africa or Latin America or Asia and they colonized the places, and they took some of them as slaves, what did they do? They said they are not human beings like us. Because how can you go to church, pray to God, and think that Jesus loves you, knowing that you have just sold somebody? So, or Allah, or any God they might have, or Satan. So this is an important aspect of language. It creates that sense that we are humans. It creates the sense of face, and then we are dealing with human beings. Is that what we do when we teach English? Is that what we do when we create the curriculum? When we plan our delivery plans? This is not, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just like you, the same, just like you, I make the same delivery plans. Just like you. I'm not Mother Teresa or some holy guy standing here. So, but where is this experience of language as a human experience in our language curriculum? And then with the AI, what's one of the differences? Syntax is not enough for meaning. Semantics is meaning. Pragmatics meaning. So what will happen when AI shapes how our students and ourselves approach language? When we input something into any of the chatbots, usually the first thing it does is correct it. It will say, yeah, Dr. Sergio, because of course, they already know me, Gemini, Copilot, they already know me. They know which books I'm reading, which articles I'm writing, which emails I've sent. Sometimes I'm like, wow, you know this email too? You say, yeah, because you wrote to the University of Buenos Aires about psychology, and this will be related. What? So, but what's missing is semantics. So what will happen when AI is the nanny teaching us to speak, but based on the code, on the syntax of things. And what's left out is the body, is the self, is consciousness. So a computer is not a being with. It's not a being with. It has no body to be vulnerable. A computer is not worried about getting older. A computer doesn't go to the toilet, look at itself in the mirror and says, oops, I have to go for Botox again. Look at this. It doesn't have that issue. A computer just does its numbers, it thinks. So what happens when that computer or that kind of entity that lives in our world now shapes how our students learn, shapes what our students think that good language is. And I will make it short. You've all heard probably about neuroplasticity. It just means that the brain is plastic in a way, it's flexible. The brain adapts. That's why, for example, if you know anybody who had a stroke, anybody who had a stroke, their brains will somehow rewire themselves to make up for the parts that are damaged. But this means two things. Our brain can change itself to become better or to become worse. So we have to be aware when we interact now with AI, how is that wiring or rewiring our brains? How is that rewiring? And secondly, just this one here, AI is great at giving us an extended mind. Okay, before everything had to be here, now this can be in many places. It can be on OneDrive, it can be on my phone, it can be on my laptop, it can be in the cloud, it can be everywhere. But the problem is also AI doesn't give us an extended heart. Yes, an extended mind, but no, an extended heart. So these are students, this is education. How do we deal with this? I will skip this for now. And in the last part, I just want to focus on this. How do we make sense through language, mathematical language, verbal language? First, we have the real. I will leave some ideas from Blackhand. So we have the real. How do we know that there is something real out there? Usually because it hits us. The real hits us. It's like, say, for example, if you're 18, how do you know that you have needs? you're 18, you're very. Do you know that you have knees? Do you ever think about your knees? No. Now, if you are 60, do you know that you have knees? Yeah, probably every morning. So, what has happened? The real has hit you. So, those needs, I know I have needs because they really confront me now. Before they didn't. For example, I had an uncle, he got 3 strokes. And once he was told, he told me he was paralyzed on one side, not the other side. And then he says, you know what happens to me very often? I am sitting and I forget that I had a stroke. And then suddenly I want to get up to go and grab something. And then I realize I can't. So this is the real in this sense. Is reality that is not domesticated, is like a force that has not been broken in, it hits us. And then he says there is the imaginary. The imaginary is when we start thinking about things but in images, but they are not connected, not quite connected. An example, for example, imagine we are driving, we have an accident. So the first thing is like, this is the real. Sergio is the baby. That is His Majesty, the baby has been, if I may use the word, castrated. I was thinking I was fine, and now I am here. Hit me. The bus crossed in front of me, and I hit the bus. The second stage maybe is blood. So this is like the imaginary. It's those pictures, those puzzle pieces of what might be happening. And then we need to come to the third level, when we make sense of that. And this is again language. And this is again our job. So how do we help our students make sense of the real in their life? How do we help them put those pieces together into a narrative? So these are the 3 pieces, as I said. First, something happens. Then we have what happened. And then we can explain this happened to me. We give it a name. And I'm coming from it. Sometimes this symbolic integration can, because we can use, as we said before, we can use language to lie. We can also use narratives to hurt others, to hurt ourselves. For example, if you have worked in a country where there are a lot of people with afro hair. I was born in Latin America, I worked in the Caribbean. So for example, I was always surprised, shocked, that sometimes they would come and touch my hair and say, oh, you have good hair. I said, what good hair? I would give anything to have your hair. But anyway, they would say, you have good hair. Yeah, it's stupid. Actually, I have Omani nephews. They didn't, when they were small, they would come and play with my hair and they would say, they wouldn't say you have good hair because they don't have this issue. So they would say, oh, your hair is taban. Your hair is like, I don't know, sleepy. What happened to your hair? But why am I saying this? Because we can have narratives. We can put things into a narrative that in the end, they hurt us. Or they hurt people. Like, this is a good nose, that's a good color, that's good hair. Or in language, all the things that we might say, oh, you are very intelligent because your essay was wonderful. If you're a student who can speak very well, who can tell wonderful stories, we never say, you're wonderful. Only the written essay is wonderful. And so this is very important to realize. We use language, but language can go in many ways. We narrate life, but we can produce all kinds of narratives. As I said before, lovely, God-fearing people who go to church and sing, Jesus loves me, or maybe they are Muslims, I will go to Al-Jannah maybe. But they went out, they took people, they sold them, or people who went to other lands, or we can see now these days, just think about Gaza. How can people who think that they are so wonderful go and just put people in a cage and kill them and destroy everything? We can only do this because we have a narrative that makes us feel good even when we are doing bad things to other people. This is our job. We are language teachers. We deal with this. Just stop. I want to go back to the idea that people are as healthy and confident as the stories they tell themselves. And I want to come back to QA. What stories do we tell about ourselves? Are we healthy? Is our work environment making us healthy? Or are we just functioning? Are we just keeping the code running, but there are no encounters? We never meet at the threshold so that we can see what we are, who we are, where we are going to. I think this is a big issue because in the whole world, now we are going mad after rankings. But are the people in those universities healthy? Are they happy? Do they say in the morning, not only Alhamdulillah, like when somebody says, oh, you've got cancer, Alhamdulillah. I always tell my wife, don't give me that, Alhamdulillah. Like, you've got cancer, Alhamdulillah. I missed the bus, Alhamdulillah. No, I don't want that, Alhamdulillah. I really want an Alhamdulillah that it's like, yes, baby. So, do we feel like this at work? And this is what I have presented. So maybe this is not the talk you were expecting, but if we are in the business of language, we need to think about language beyond learning outcomes. And these are the learning outcomes. Okay, what are we achieving? What's the output? There are 7 minutes, so I didn't consult that.
Thank you for that warm introduction, Ms. Siham, and to our keynote speaker, Dr. Sergio. Thank you for such an insightful and inspiring presentation. You are certainly given us a lot to think about and maybe even few notes to review later. We truly appreciate your valuable contribution. We now move on to our guest speaker segment. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Mariam Al-Hajri, who will introduce our guest speaker.
Good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Ahmed Al-Muta'ani. Dr. Ahmed Al-Muta'ani is the Associate Dean for the General Education and the General Foundation Program at the Modern College of Business and Science in Muscat, Oman. He holds a PhD in curriculum and instruction with a specialization in ESOL, bilingual education, from the University of Florida, USA, and a master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages from the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Dr. Al-Muta'ani has taught many courses in ESL, EFL, critical thinking, public speaking, and interpersonal communication in both Oman and the United States. His areas of expertise include aggregation, applied linguistics, and language assessment. His research draws on multiple areas, including computer-assisted language learning, teacher education, curriculum development, social justice, and critical race theory. Most importantly, his recent research explores racial linguistic perspective and the decolonial turn in language education. He has presented his research at local and international conferences, and he is an active member of a professional association, including TESOL Arabia, the Florida Association for Bilingual Education, and the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. He also served as a reviewer for the Journal of Language, Identity, and Education. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Ahmed Al-Muta'ani.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? No? This is my natural voice, I guess. Hello? Can you hear me now? Okay. Hello? Maybe I will use the other one. Good morning. I'd like to first of all to thank the organizers for this invitation. I don't know what we're gonna say after this inspiring talk, by Dr. Sergio. I think he covered a lot, and I think we're ready to go home, I guess. You don't have to listen to me anymore. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about almost similar concepts that Dr. Sergio covered, but from a practical perspective. I think he touched upon. Hello? Okay. So I'm not going to talk too philosophical like the way you did. I mean, you give very good foundational knowledge about the idea of using AI in teaching and so on, and the history and so on, and connected this to more like linguistics and psycholinguistics. So I'm going to talk about it from a different perspective. So the topic would be teaching English in the age of AI, global technologies, but what? Local realities. So I'm trying to focus on the local context and how we should use this technology more responsibly. So these are the topics that I'm going to cover today. The rise of AI and its promise, then questioning whether AI is neutral or not. Then I'm going to talk about some evidence of some biases and dominance when it comes to the use of AI. And then we're going to talk about the Omani context and how we can use this in our context. And then, maybe we need to change the perspective or the mindset of using this technology. Because I think we have bought into this idea that AI is the life, okay? And I'm using the life because, I meant the life. Because everybody wants to learn about AI. This is like the buzzword that we want to sort of associate ourselves with nowadays. So we need to be very careful when it comes to this. So we need to start rethinking the way we look at AI when it comes to teaching. And then I'll try to share some practical examples, hopefully you can use inside the classroom. And then I will share my final message about the use of AI in your classroom setting. We good? Hello? Okay. So I want to have a small poll, okay? I want you to raise your hand when you see the statement, okay? Have you used AI? Well, almost 100%, yeah? You cannot lie, okay? Otherwise, you'll not get promotion, yeah? I think it's connected to PD, yeah? So if you don't do AI workshops, attend workshops, and so on, you are in trouble, correct? Okay, I'm putting you in trouble, Dr. Hilal. At least, we don't have a lot of big bananas here, so I can take, freely, okay? So what about your students? Yeah? Your students are using AI? Okay, I can see like 100%. Yes, exactly. Definitely. And we also using AI. It's very ironic that we feel sad and disappointed that our students are using AI. On the other hand, we tend to use AI extensively, okay? So it's very ironic, And then, are you excited about the AI? Yeah? 100%, yeah? Okay. Are you worried about AI? Okay. Are you worried about your students using AI? Not you using AI. Ah, okay. There you go. There you go. We're going to talk about this in a minute, okay? So, according to some resources here, 92% of students tend to use AI. I think this is in 2025. I assume that this percentage, went up this year. And 85% on a weekly basis, teachers tend to use AI. And when it comes to the use of a ChatGPT, which is one of the most tools when it comes to using AI, we are having more than 180 million users, okay, of AI. I deleted one slide, actually, about the most companies that tend to produce this AI. I thought that, this would sound more political, okay, but for my surprise, most of them are created in the US, which could tell you something, okay? Why, for example, there's so much extensive investment in the use of AI. Is it only for education purposes or for other purposes? I will leave it for you to decide, okay? So, of course, AI didn't start in 2022, okay? We had this AI a long time ago, but I think, we connect AI use to the appearance of what? ChatGPT, yeah? But the concept of AI started way earlier in the 50s, okay? With this idea of AI concept, and then, the machine learning, and then we also had this automated writing evaluation, chatbots, and so on. And actually, what happened in 2022, this AI technology or concept becomes what? Accessible to people. It used to be used for political, military purposes. And this is very important. You need to understand the history of AI. And then they decided to have one kind of, let's say, window for education purposes. But the whole thing started mainly for militant, purposes. So these are very common tools that we tend to use, as educators, especially for teaching English. For example, we use a ChatGPT for what? Draft, outlines, for generative writing. For example, Grammarly for what? Feedback, yeah? For example, conversation bots, we use it. We use what? Duolingo backs, and also pronunciation apps, like Also Speak and others. And also nowadays as teachers, we use what? Lesson generation, like Magic School AI for activities and quizzes. So there are so many tools actually that are very common nowadays and used by teachers. So this is a fact. We cannot, deny that fact. So I think this is something that we tend to face every day, correct? A student submitting what? A perfect what? Essay. No grammatical issues, no errors, okay? How do you feel about it? Easy to, okay, so a very positive way to look at it. So you don't have to worry too much, A, yeah? A plus, whatever. So, so they're making your life much easier, yeah? So, yeah. So, but this is the reality, actually. So it is fluent, structured, and no errors at all, yeah? So, but it's not theirs, okay? So we know this is as a fact because we know their performance before, and now suddenly out of the blue, they are writing perfect English. So this is the reality, correct? For a lot of us. So we know that AI is something really good sometimes. Why? Because it can personalize learning. Yeah, especially if it is used in the right, manner and for the right purpose. It can give also what? Instant what? Feedback for the learner, for the teacher, for whoever who's using what? AI. And then, of course, according to literature, there's so much opportunities for practice and use, if you use it what? Wisely, if you have that kind of mindset that you want to improve. Okay, I don't know if you attended the online also conference, by Ibra, UTAS-Ibra, last week. Okay, I think, this concept was also talked about by Dr. Ali Al-Isa. Okay, the AI ideology. So when we talk about AI ideologies, we are not talking about only generating what? Languages. But we're talking about what? What assumptions that this technology tends to what? Propagate. And here what I mean is what? Correct, clear, and what? Value. Because AI tools are usually programmed in a certain way to tell you which is correct and what is not correct, what is acceptable and not acceptable. Yeah? So this is, what AI ideology, which means It's not about, the product anymore. It's about, what, changing your mindset. What I have, what I know, is sometimes is not enough. So you have to follow what? Another system in order to what? To be considered what? Correct. And this is dangerous. We tend to complain about our students not being creative, okay? Thinking outside the box. But actually, AI is putting us in boxes. Because if you don't follow that box, you're going to be in trouble. And this is very dangerous. And I think, we as educators, we have to be very aware of this. We need to communicate this to our students. And instead of whining and complaining, oh, our students, produce, perfect essays. I think maybe we should have a conversation. And you might be surprised, honestly. I've seen a lot of students who would respond positively when we have this real conversation. We tend to assume from the beginning, they are students, I'm the source of knowledge, and they have to follow my lead. And this is very dangerous because you're trying to shut them down as if AI is doing, actually, indirectly. So you should have this conversation with your students. I'm sure that this will not have a greater impact immediately on them, but at least, if you have one or two, this is by itself is a great success. You cannot change everybody, but if you are able to change one or two, okay, who also will take the lead and hopefully will try to influence other people, then this is a good thing that we should do. Okay, so according to the literature, and remember the idea that most of these AI tools are coming from the West. So most of these norms are Western-oriented norms. So they are based on that culture. So, and it makes sense. If this is something produced in the West, it has to follow what? The Western norms. But what I'm trying to say here is that the idea is it's okay to have Western ideologies in this, or norms, or whatever. But to block other views to enter that kind of what? Let's say space is my issue. Because most of these AI tools are programmed to accept one norm and reject others. You understand what I'm saying? So it is very dangerous, okay? So I am okay with the idea that you need to have your own norms. This is fine. But at the same time, you need to what? To listen to the other people. You should be accepting to other views. And this is what sometimes AI tools tend to do, is to frame you, okay, in that particular what? Box. And you should not, leave that one. Otherwise, you're not correct, you're not accurate, and you're not relevant. So English dominates online content, whether we like it or not. Most of the content that we have is in English, okay, which shows that, there's a domination here. Also, the idea of the structure. You have to follow only the structure. Other structures are not accepted, and then you tend to follow what? One format. And of course, center-based, knowledge and production, which means who are cited most of the time. People who follow what? These norms. But if you're not following the same norms, you're out of the picture, okay? And then, of course, limited representation for other types of Englishes. We know for a fact now that people who speak English are more than native speakers of English, correct? So that will definitely lead to the idea of having more varieties, correct? You don't have to sound American, you don't have to sound British, you don't have to speak British English, you don't have to speak American English, okay? But it means that, there are more varieties. But with this kind of technology, limiting other options to be part of the formula, okay, will always lead to this kind of what? Thinking, okay? That we only want to use this kind of English, okay? Of course, some people might say, well, if we open the floor for other types of Englishes, then it will be very difficult to follow and so on, okay? Could be true if English is limited to a certain context, but now English is spoken almost everywhere. So there should be a level of acceptance to other types of English, okay? And remember also, not everybody will have the same kind of experience that will need this kind of what, let's say, orientation. That you have to sound American, or you have to sound British, or you have to sound, in a certain way, or you have to write in a certain fashion. No. So this is one thing that we need to think about. Okay. This is basically the same thing that I was trying to say here. It's the form of where standardization is what forced upon us. You have to follow this to be part of the format. And the idea of efficiency, what is correct. Yeah? Because now with a button, you can get an essay written in what? Maybe part of a second? I don't know, not even a second. Okay? Just write an essay about, Jalan. I'm from Jalan. Okay? So, and then you will have, like a complete essay written for you. While before, we need to think about it, what kind of ideas we're going to talk about, and so on. And then, you will write the first draft, maybe the second draft, and maybe you'll get to the third draft. Okay? And that kind of interaction with your teacher and yourself, as a student, is not there anymore. Because now, suddenly, you have everything written to you. I appreciated a lot that kind of interaction with my professor. Okay, first the draft. Okay. Oh, okay. You need to work on this and this and that. Not only language, but ideas. Not only that, it is a two-way learning process. He also will learn from me about my culture, I will learn about his culture. So a mutual learning. But with this one, this is one-way ticket. It's my way or the highway. Okay? So that's, the kind of what AI is trying to what? To propagate. The idea of authority. Yeah? So you have to follow this in order to be accepted. And this is very dangerous. Okay? Not for us as educators, but also for our students. Okay? Now, I made it very clear for myself that I will always talk about the decolonial perspective wherever I go. Because this is something that I was exposed to, and I think we need as educators, especially in this kind of setting, to learn about. So basically, a decolonial perspective was developed in South America or Latin America, where it's a movement trying to sort of resist Western ideologies, okay, when it comes to education, history, and so on. We want to give a chance for other people to tell their stories. And instead of putting people in boxes, yeah, and you have to follow only this format or this way of, or this story only, you can challenge that story. You can share your narrative, and instead of having one narrative that everybody has to follow. So, the traditional assumption is that what? Knowledge is universal. Yeah? Which means what? Everybody has to learn the same knowledge, which is not true. Yeah? I think you give very good examples how we perceive one statement differently based on our culture, our education, sometimes even our mode, or let's say, for our mood, that day. Let's say you're upset. You might give what? A different answer. But maybe when you cool down after 5 minutes, you might have a different perspective. So I think, with AI, we don't have that special. So it is the knowledge, according to the decolonial perspective, it's all about context. Okay? Context, context, context. And then there's only one English type. This is not true when it comes to decolonial perspective. There are multiple Englishes, okay, that we need to take in consideration. And then technology is what? Neutral, which is not the case when it comes to decolonial perspective. it reflects what? Power. Who decides what is inside? Who decides what is we should be removed or excluded from that kind of technology? And of course, propagating that anything Western is more sophisticated is the goal for you to learn. And if it is not Western, then it is what? Very simple. And then you don't need to learn because it is what? Simple. Okay? I think every culture is rich and can contribute to the conversation. So let's talk about this evidence, some evidence or some examples of evidence of dominance when it comes to the AI. So for example, if you ask AI to improve your writing, just say you wrote something, yeah? And then you ask AI to improve it. What's going to happen? You might get a completely different version. Your ideas are gone. Okay? They're telling you, hey, no, 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 no. Your thinking is wrong. This is the wrong direction. You need to think this way. This is the best way. Are you with me? So the idea of improving is connected to what kind of knowledge already put into that kind of what AI. So the product is removing repetition, which is good, adding transition and restructuring argument and so on. But the output is what? Standard academic English. And all your style, that you used to, is gone. Okay? So why? Because you have to follow what? The model. Otherwise, you're wrong. Okay, this is also something that was introduced way before sometimes, like the conversation of what AI. But this is even applicable to our time now when it comes to the use of AI. Are you familiar with the African American, English? Yeah? It's a variety spoken by African American community in the United States of America. Okay, so for example, he be working. Is it correct English? You see, grammatically incorrect, you see? Why? Because we are trained to think that this is the only way of doing it. But I was reading this piece of article written by one professor, I think, Green, yes. And she discovered that African American English sometimes is even more, systematic than standard English in terms of rules. Not all the time, but it's more systematic than what? Standard English. Okay, because it follows certain rules. Okay, go, we said, what's the past tense for go? Went, yeah? Yeah. So, what about work? Huh? Worked, yeah? So you add ed. Why? Huh? So you see that there are a lot of things that you need to think about. Yeah? Register bias, for example, global academic English. For example, if a student might use a certain word because of a story that happened to that person, and they are connected to that word. There's an emotional connection to that word. But when you ask AI to improve it, it might use a word that you don't even have a connection to. The only thing that you will get it from this is that another sophisticated maybe term. But you might not have the same connection to that word. Are you with me? So hard, maybe it can bring a lot of memories to you. But AI might say what? Challenging to comprehend. And then, say, what is comprehend? Okay, okay, understand. And then, it sometimes, these experiences are taken away from us. They are not given to us anymore. Why? Because we are treated as what? Consumers of knowledge. And this is very dangerous. We should be producers of knowledge. we should be part of that conversation. Okay, so I think we need to have that conversation with the students. That do you want to be at the end or at the category of receiving only or what? Producing. And I think if we have this kind of honest conversation with our students, you might be surprised. They might, change their mindset. And then, of course, this is also another example for Nigerian English. For example, when you say, I'm coming, what comes to your mind? Yeah. Yeah, you're coming towards something. But actually, for them, it means what? I'll be back, in a minute. You understand? So that cultural component is not there. Now, when you ask somebody from Nigeria to express that, and they said, no, I didn't mean that. But still, he would be marked what? Wrong. Why? Because it's not according to the standard English, okay? The most imposed one. The same thing, when it comes to structuring arguments. Maybe the way we tend to present our arguments culturally different from the way sometimes maybe the West tend to do it. That's one way to look at it, and we have a lot of respect for that. But sometimes, maybe you have another way to present your argument. But, as remember the idea of putting everybody in boxes that you have to follow. And this is also something that we need to be very careful. The technological, techno-linguistic bias when it comes to the dominance of major languages in NLP. So the languages used are also decided by the companies, and the companies are usually in a certain country, and they tend to what? To sell it to you. And I find it very interesting. Nowadays in the business of textbooks, yeah, they tell you this version is for the Middle East. Okay, this version is for the GCC countries. And what do you notice about this? Yeah, have you noticed? The only thing that I've noticed, at least, because I did a lot of studies when it comes to the textbook that we receive based on the context, okay, they tend to tell you that these cultures are only good when it comes to fun. Muscat Festival. Yeah? But the text about economy is about a Western culture. Okay? Education. It's a Western country. But when it comes to, the non-Western context, it's just, you're just having fun, you're dancing, festivals, okay? I don't know if you noticed this, but I did, I tried, because we're trying to find a textbook that fits, our context. And all the time, the level of sophistication is always attached to West, and, we just, guys were having fun, okay, which is very interesting, okay? I want you to look at the textbook. I don't know which books you're using here. Okay, just have a look. Okay, maybe after the session, and you can write back to me, okay, and tell me what you think. You're using also the Middle East version? Okay. Okay. What else here I wanted to check? Okay. For example, even the meaning that we attach to certain, let's say, ideas. What a successful woman, for example, an independent woman who has to work, who has to do this, has to do that, and so on. But if you're not doing that, you're full of failure. Yeah? So that's also something that I have noticed when I was typing a lot of things, when it comes to it. So I don't know, I just have this habit of analyzing the content that I usually get from AI. And every time there's something very interesting, okay? And this idea of pulling up, resources, oh my goodness. Okay, all the names. Ah, okay, certain nationality. Unless you are intentional about it and you ask about it. But the first thing that you will have, okay, at the top of your list will be from a certain culture, from a certain country. Okay, guys, you have to tell me about the time because I know I like to talk. Okay? So this idea again, global English is that English is a plural, and it is not one system, but it is what many what system because context matters the most. Okay, I think this is also another issue with a lot of people trying to publish. You might want to use a certain voice, a certain style, okay, but you're telling, there's a problem with your English. You cannot use this. This is wrong choice of words, okay? Why? Because this is not part of the standard English. Although that word, that they think that it is a bad choice, I have a lot of connection to it. And I can prove that why I'm using that word, not another word. But because it's not part of the AI lexicon, okay, then, it will consider my style as incorrect. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that we need to have something called what? Contextualized AI pedagogy, which means you need to put context in the front of you all the time. You need to be very intentional, okay, when it comes to the use of materials. So use AI. I'm not saying that you should not use AI. This is a reality that hits, okay, that we have to deal with. Okay, but you need to adapt to your own context, and you need to make sure that your identity is what protected when you use AI. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to generate, no problem, which means you need to use AI, but you need to critique, you need to question things before you use them. And then, of course, you need to what? To adapt and refine. I know there are a lot of policies that are imposed on us, and sometimes we don't have control. But I always say, you are the king or the queen of your classroom. You can do a lot. You can still follow the rules, but you still have to have your own, kingdom, if you want to call it. Okay, so that you can what? Educate people around you in order to understand, okay, how I can use this AI technology more responsibly. So our role as educators is what? Is to not to provide knowledge like in the past. We're moving towards what? Thinking facilitators, which means we need to think all the time. And then we are critical what? Guys. We need to critically think before we consume. We are not consumers anymore or only providers for somebody's knowledge, but we are what? Thinking. And we are what? Critical about whatever we see. Okay, so these are some exercises that I thought maybe you can use maybe in your classroom. So my message again, I'm not saying that you should not use the AI because of all these issues and problems and so on. No, 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 no. At least we should be what? Knowledgeable about these. Okay, so that when we use AI, we know what to do. So this is one good exercise. I tried it with my students. So I call it AI versus me. So I always ask my students, to start right. I know they don't like it, and then they grumpy about it and so on. But I still try to tell them that this is important. So they write, and then I tell them, you know what? Now you can use AI, okay? But with certain what guidelines? For example, let's say, write a paragraph, for example, okay, about, let's say, Jalan, for a B1 student, for example, okay, level. okay? And for an Omani student, for example. Are you with me? I need to put all these, okay, let's say, factors into the search, or for what we call it, the prompt, exactly, before we get to the final image. Otherwise, you will end up with what? I don't know. Hallucination? I don't know. What's the word? But anyway, you will end up with something that is not relevant to your context. Are you with me? So this is very important. And then you ask your students to learn from both versions. Okay? And then if there's a new word that they will learn, they can, adapt to their writing and so on. So it is a chance for them to reflect. So now it is a chance. It's a writing class, but they get a chance to write, they get a chance to read, they get a chance to what? Reflect and critically analyze, the piece that they will get. And then finally they will reproduce their own version, okay, at the end of the class or the next class. Okay, this is for more sophisticated classes. If you have students who are the critical, they're good in English, and then now they are moving to the idea of being critical thinkers, then you can use this. So they read a piece, and you ask them to find any examples of what biases about their own culture, okay? And then they look at it, they try to challenge those ideas, they can try to correct these misconceptions about their culture, about whatever is mentioned in that piece. And then they write a letter to the writer saying, we have noticed that you didn't have solid knowledge about this and this and that, and we are writing to you to clarify all these kind of concepts to you, so that you have a better understanding. Remember, the goal is not to attack. The goal is what? To correct, to have a mutual understanding. Because most of the time, because we don't understand each other, we got into fight. We assume that you are this, and they assume we are like this, and then we don't have that conversation. So I think we need to train our students not to only criticize people, but also to what? To correct these misconceptions to the people who don't understand. Especially when it comes to your culture, to your own context. You are a very good source for that. So this is, and then, they check, the culture, and then they improve the text through either a letter to the person who wrote it, or through an argumentative essay challenging all these biases in that writing. And this is something that we did in our college, and then it was published as a paper for speaking. I don't know if you know that in Microsoft Teams, there's a feature called Speaker progress. So you can activate that one, and then you can ask the students to practice or rehearse their presentation. It will record, and then it will give them feedback. So, and it is part of the grading system. So they will have 2 attempts for each assignment to ensure that they rehearse, they practice, they get feedback, and then they improve. So during the day of a presentation, the presentation will be done face to face. Are you with me? So they already have enough of practice and feedback about about their pronunciation, about their ideas, and so on. And then after that, maybe hopefully that will increase their confidence when it comes to giving a presentation. And what we found, that 95% reported that the level of anxiety reduced, okay, after using this kind of rehearsal sessions. And 88% reported that they were confident after using this kind of practice before the presentation. If you want, you can check the paper um, just to read, more about, the the exact task that we did. And so, if you are interested, okay. So this is, when it comes to the paper. I hope this will work. I hope technology will not fail me. Is it working? Okay. You see something? Okay. Okay, I'm glad. Okay, so my final message, okay, to you as educators of English, is not only better English, but it has to be what? Meaningful English. Something that we like to refer to, we can associate ourselves to, we can have this kind of attachment to in order to what? To feel the value of language. And I always say, language can be a weapon, okay, a weapon to destruct or to amend. So it is your choice, whether you want to amend or you want to destruct. And if you want to have some of the resources that I mentioned in the presentation, you can have them here. Okay, I hope you have any questions. You're done with the list? Not yet. Okay, we good? And this is for the paper again? Yeah. Huh? There's nothing after that. This is the list of the paper? Okay. We're behaving like students now, huh? Okay. And we get frustrated, yeah? Okay. You want the this one? Okay. Oh, sorry. She wants this. Okay. And this is for you, Mr. Shadidi. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Thank you, Ms. Mariam, for that kind introduction. And to our guest speaker, Dr. Ahmed Al-Muta'ani, thank you for such an engaging and insightful presentation. I'm sure many of us are already thinking about how to apply your ideas in our own work. Now we will have Q&A session for our guest speaker. So if you have any questions, you may start. Please introduce yourself and mention which guest you want to ask.
Okay, good morning, doctor. This is Dr. Faridi from PSC here. My question is to Dr. Ahmed Al-Khatani. Doctor, you are talking about AI and the problem of standard English. What I think is this process of standardization happens in almost every language, every single language. It happens in Arabic, it happens in my language. If we allow all dialects, all sociolects, then it is almost impossible for us to communicate or come up with standardized language. So it is not specific to English alone. It is common to all languages. And the second question is, if you compare what actually the first speaker said, he said we are born into language per se. Then you said we are not just consumers of language, we are also producers of language. There is a contradiction there. If we are born into a language, we end up being consumers of language. How do you look at it, this contradiction? Thank you.
I think, yeah, we are born into language, but the fact, for example, that we can read, I mean, that native speakers can read Shakespeare and say, this is not my English, or that Arabs can read the Quran and say, this is not my Arabic. So the language precedes us, but as with everything else, we appropriate the world. For example, we are born, let's say, with mountains next to us, and we dig a tunnel. So it's both. There is this element of receiving or being received into the world, but changing the world. Of course, I think an important element will be what Doctor said, not just better, but more meaningful. So in some kinds of language use, the code is very important because what we produce should be unambiguous. For example, if you're an engineer and you read something, you want to make sure that what you are reading or what you understand is exactly what you need to know and what was said. Or if you're doing medicine, for example, you're not going to go and write poetic, I don't know, the patient slept, and it means, I don't know, that the patient died. So it will depend on this. Where is it more meaningful to incorporate all this diversity, and where it is more meaningful to adhere to the code? I think that will be the question. If we have critical creative writing, if we are writing for business purposes, and you know that you can be taken to court, or you can lose a lot of money. I remember 1 year I studied law, just 1 year. And one of the cases cost the company billions or millions of billions, and it was all about comma somewhere. So there will be places where the language has to be very, very strict, and the other places it doesn't have to be like this. And this is one thing we were also trying to say. AI cannot always distinguish. And when AI wants to emulate this, it will be weird. Oh, that's strange.
Just if you allow me also to elaborate. And I'm not saying that we should reject, standard English. Please don't get that, message. Or what I'm trying to say is that we should have an opportunity to be part of that space in a way that we need to teach our students that, this is a reality. Now, if you want to get, published in a certain journal, okay, these are the rules, and you have to deal with it. But at the same time, you need to give them a space where they can use that variety outside. What AI is trying to do now is to say only one version. For us as educators, we cannot control AI. AI will always have its own rules and regulations and, you know, let's say, uh, norms and so on. But you, as a teacher inside the classroom, you will tell your students, yes, this is what we should do in this classroom. But it doesn't mean that if you write differently, okay, you're wrong. Because now AI is telling you that the other variety is wrong. And this is what I'm trying to get into. I'm not saying that, academic English is wrong. No, 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 no. Okay? We'll have to have one standard that we refer to, as you said, because, it will be very difficult to cope with all these varieties that we have. But all what I'm trying to say is that, you need to accept other varieties in certain contexts. Okay? And then, you create another space for your learner to express themselves. And instead of them becoming mechanical and learning only one way, which is good because they need to make money, okay, out of, that. But at the same time, they need to be also human. And when they want you to be human, you need to create that space for them. So there's a the distinction between that context and that context. And remember, the idea of context matters. I will have to train my students to follow the rules. It doesn't mean that, you know what? Don't worry. Forget about this academic English. This would be, insane to think that way. You will have also to follow rules. Life is not about, doing whatever you want. No. It's about also following the rules. And this is one way to look at things. But at the same time, I'm creating another space for my human part, not the mechanical. That's the mechanical, okay, imposed space that we have to follow, whether we like it or not. When you produce a paper, you'll have to follow the guidelines, given to you. And if you want to get published, you'll have to follow that. But at the same time, I should have my own space, okay, when I talk to my friends, okay? I don't have to speak that language all the time, with him or with her, so that people will think that, I have to be in that kind of box, back the idea to the box.
Thank you. My only point is that, just a follow-up. We very well know that AI is actually fed with certain ideology. There is an ideological underpinning to AI. But as of now, if we look at the underpinning that governs the AI usage, it is primarily diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think should we be really worried about? I think this is something that we should all support. And if you ask AI to give you a cut and dry monochromatic viewpoint, it would say, no, I am not allowed to do so. And it supports diversity. So this is what I understand from my use of AI. So I think, I don't think, we should be extremely worried about it. This is actually my perspective after having used AI for a long time. Thank you.
Also, it's a predictive system. So, for example, if I say this is bed, it will tell me it's not a bed. But if suddenly we all start calling this a bed, it will accept bed because it's a mathematical prediction. So a lot depends on the corpus that is fed into it. So if we broaden the corpus, then the predictions will change. And I think we need to remember this is not AI. There are human beings behind. It's like when people tell you, no, it's not me, it's the system. What system? I mean, somebody made the system, somebody approved the system, somebody reviewed the system, somebody kept the system. So we also have to be aware of it. And some things are already there. For example, when I learned how to write letters, or emails, I would never write, I hope this email thing finds you well. I would say, say but now AI is giving me this. It will include this. So this has been incorporated.
Secondly, for example, where I come from, you don't use the word a name with the word doctor. So you would use family name. I would be Dr. Stabilin, I wouldn't be Dr. Sir. But now even when you do this, it will tell you this is wrong, unless, for example, you are in the Arab world. This is the rule now in the Arab world. If I say maybe Dr. Al-Baluchi, it doesn't feel like I'm so predictive. We have that semantic, pragmatic level whereby we don't just use words because most of us use the word, but the words come with feelings. And what he gives, his example of the word hard was very good. You just put challenging, for example, I don't know, maybe you are less passionate than me. Sometimes I want to write an email and I want the other person to feel that I am upset. I really want the person to feel I am upset. And then AI will say, no, 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 no. It changes everything. Then, for example, I find this to be very challenging. I can hear my Caribbean friends saying, what freaking challenging. This is, so this is what I want you to hear. Because if I put challenging, yeah, challenging can be anything. You want character. You go to the kitchen and there is no milk. Oh, this is challenging. But so that is the human element that we might risk losing if AI knows what is good for us. And this is connected, sorry, I'm talking too much, but this is connected with elements like self-efficacy, self-trust. Um, I'll give you an example. If you write an article and you want to send it to a publisher, my advice would be double check it using AI. Why? Because the publishers will use AI. Before any human being reads your article, AI will decide which article is readable or deserves to be read. So please check that AI likes it, so that probably they will like it too. And I write my texts, I run them through AI, and then AI will tell me, it sounds like AI generated. So then I tell AI, please humanize it for me. And so that's why what we did also, we need this hybrid element. Alone, human with human, human with AI. Our question is, how do we do it? How do we respect ourselves? Very good.
Hello. My question is for Dr. Ahmed. So, as someone who appreciates using creativity in the classroom and really is against the idea of the box that you have mentioned, although we can use the box, it depends on the way we use it. What are some activities that can ensure that our students know how to use AI as an assistant instead of dependent on it completely?
I think, thank you for the question. Um, for me, I believe in changing mindset. I believe in having a conversation with the most concerned, okay, stakeholder. Because we all assume that our students don't want to learn. They want the easy way, okay? And based on that assumption, we react. For me, I would definitely have a very good conversation with myself. I will listen to them. I'll ask them why you're using AI, and I should not be judgmental. You know, you will have to understand their circumstances. Some of them, they don't even have a good place to live in. Okay, they have to take care of their family members and so on. Back to the idea of a human. Okay, I think when we start acting more mechanical than a human, this is what we end up with. I think having a good conversation, you're willing to listen, not to dictate things, not to impose things. We tend to act, we are the source of knowledge. We provide you knowledge. We know better. Okay? And if you don't listen to me, you will not have a future. You're already creating a block, a barrier between you and your students. Okay? You are a failure because you're using AI. So I think, first of all, you need to talk to them about the purpose of this life. What do they want to be? You need to talk to them, for example, if you don't do it now, you will end up with somebody who's still seeking a job graduating 10 years back. You know what I did once? I invited one of my students who graduated a long time ago, who was not serious about his study. He's having his own business. And I ask him all the time to share his personal story about not being serious in the class. Literally, I invite him every single semester to share his story. And believe it or not, the students, some of them, of course, you cannot change everybody in the classroom, but at least you should start changing that mindset, having a conversation, honest conversation between you and your students. And then think about, the other side, what kind of activities we do. Trust their judgment. When they come up with, good argument, maybe it look like simple to you. And remember, there are so many barriers that they have to deal with. First of all, the language barrier. This is not their first language. I sometimes, I get very frustrated with my colleagues teaching, level 1 students, okay, or beginner level. And then I said, you need to critically think. Critically think. They cannot produce a sentence. You see, you need to be very realistic in your expectation. Okay? Are you trying to develop their linguistic competence now at this stage? And then you add, small dosages, from time. I know this is not, this is a luxury that I have because I speak Arabic. I sometimes said, write in Arabic, no problem. Write your ideas in Arabic. I want you to think. Now use AI to translate those ideas. And then, talk to me about those ideas. Because I want them to think. If the goal is to think, then they have to use their first language as a source of learning. They need to look at their language or first language, their mother tongue, as from what we call it, not a deficit perspective, but as a resource that they can learn from. And believe it or not, sometimes, you will be surprised. And I like, collecting these kind of papers from them. And you know what I do? I take them home and I write, like very good comments to them. Oh my goodness, you're very smart. Keep the good thinking, I know that this is something that not everybody can do because if you don't speak Arabic, you might not. But at least you can just tell them, use Arabic to think. And then when it comes to the production, you can use AI and then share it. Even if they make mistakes, it's okay. I always say, class is the best place to make mistakes. Because when you leave, everybody will judge you. Yeah? Oh, you were taught by Dr. Hilal Al-Hajri? Oh my goodness. Okay, I can run after him. Yeah? But inside the classroom, you always have, a chance to make mistakes. And then you learn from these mistakes. For me, education is about learning, relearning, and unlearning sometimes. We need to unlearn a lot of things. The way we were taught how to be teachers might not necessarily the best fit for our students. We like, unfortunately, most of the time we tend to impose our ideology. Okay, I learn this way, they have to learn this way. Okay, we act like students, dictators. Okay, we want everybody to learn. Look, I'm a successful person, so if you don't follow me as a role model, huh, you will fail. I think we need to stop having this conversation with our students. And remember one thing: you could not change the whole world. If you could have one person who could talk about your contribution to his success story, that's enough. This is not a popularity contest. This is an impact story. Whether you can impact your society, people around you, or not. One person, for me, is more than enough than having 20 failures in 7.
For example, I'm interested in seeing when I read the thesis at the end of this year of master's students. I want to see how many of them have cited books or articles that were written in Arabic. I will be paying attention to this because that means that somebody, it can mean two things: that there are no intelligent people in the Arab world writing in Arabic. That would have to be proven. And then we will have a psychological question: why are they not writing in Arabic? Or why are they not reading in Arabic? Who put this idea into the minds of people who speak more than one language? They can only use English when it comes to scholarly endeavors. I use Spanish books. Even I take online courses from Latin America. I use Italian. I use Dutch. And I'm not saying this to show off. I'm saying this. Why? Because what I hear in Spanish texts, what I hear in Latin American courses, I never hear or almost never hear in English. When I read about education in English, it's all about efficiency. When I hear about education in Spanish, it's all about people's growth, developing communities. There are two different ways of looking at education. I'm sure there is a discourse about education going on in Arabic. You cannot have so many thousands of Arabs. I mean, everywhere there are people who are not very brainy, but everywhere there are people who are brainy. So why is this not happening? And it starts in our classrooms. I always tell my students, education is also a colonial project. We are the soldiers. We are the soldiers of all these projects that can be national sometimes. I'm not saying that the foreigners are all the bad ones. But whose master's bidding are we actually doing? So if our students think that there is no knowledge in Arabic, where did they learn that from? So in our language classroom, there is so much going on. I know we have to write wonderful CLOs, and then we have to moderate exams, pre-exam, post-exam. We have to check whether the graduate attributes are being achieved or not. I know there is so much going on, but there is so much that is not going on that should be going on. I think we have to think about universities.
And I would just add, start at your classroom. I know that your boss, Dr. Hilal, is having certain expectation. Dr. Habib is having also certain expectation. The management of UTAS is also having certain expectations. But you also have your own expectations. Why you're left out? If you are not intentionally added to the conversation, create that reality. Yeah, just add value to yourself. It doesn't have to be communicated to the big bananas, I call them. Okay? Just have your own. You know, you deserve to be heard, to be listened to. So I think create your reality inside the classroom, even at a smaller scale. And remember, the goal is not to change the world. This is a kind of impossible mission, I would call it. Okay, don't even entertain this idea. I'm going to change the world. This would be just out of sanity, to think that you can change the world. There's no way that you can. But you can change the surroundings. You can change, people around you by having a conversation. If they're willing to listen, it's okay. If they don't listen, at least I've got my own voice heard. And this is by itself is a very satisfying feeling for you and for people who care for you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Sergio. Now, it's time to recognize and honor our distinguished guests. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Abdullah Al-Azri, Deputy to the Assistant Vice Chancellor of the University of Technology and Applied Sciences, IBRA. We also welcome Dr. Hilal Al-Hajri, the Head of Center. Dr. Sergio Salim Scatolini. Dr. Ahmed Al-Muta'ani. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Hilal, for doing the honor. We truly appreciate your support. Now, I think all of you are waiting for this moment because we are going to have a tea break now. So this is your moment to network and exchange ideas. Please make your way to designated refreshment area and enjoy the break. We kindly ask everyone to return on time so we can continue smoothly with the next session. Thank you.